afraid of the dark.
Hello, my listener. Today's horror story is about a real-life maniac who preyed on babies. Get your tea and coffee ready and we'll get started. And before we begin, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and leave your reactions and comments. I don't ask that very often. Let's go. Anatoly Biryukov was born on February 18, 1939, in the Moscow suburb of Chekhov. His father, Lieutenant General Nikolai Biryukov, was a prominent military figure, a veteran of the Great Patriotic War, and a hero of the Soviet Union. He raised his son strictly and dreamed of making him into a real man. The boy, from an early age, was interested in weapons, and at the age of 8, he managed to get access to his father's box of ammunition. He knew that gunpowder was inside the cartridges, which could be used to make firecrackers, a favorite pastime for children of that generation. To get to the gunpowder, the boy started sawing a cartridge with a hacksaw, but at one point the gunpowder exploded, injuring him. As a result, Anatoly Biryukov was left with deep and disfiguring scars on his face for the rest of his life. He explained the scars to others by claiming that he had accidentally overturned a pot of boiling water onto himself as a child. The scars had a significant impact on Biryukov's life. He became the target of ridicule by the neighborhood boys, causing him to withdraw into himself, stop playing in the yard, and avoid going outside. However, he excelled in school, was favored by his teachers, and was known for his integrity among his few peer acquaintances. After graduating, Biryukov chose not to follow in his father's military footsteps. Instead, he became a mechanic and worked at a construction company in the capital. Anatoly's father was not thrilled with his son's career choice, but he was proud that his son was valued at work for his responsibility and professionalism. Despite his insecurities about his appearance, Biryukov married and had 2 daughters with his wife. However, there were issues in their intimate life, which Biryukov later used to explain as deviant attraction to infants, a desire that suddenly awakened within him. Even one of his own daughters could have become a victim, but Biryukov was afraid of the potential scandal and did not harm her. Instead, he started abducting and abusing other people's infants to satisfy his urges. In 1971, Biryukov attempted his first crime. While returning from work, he walked past a children's clinic and noticed a stroller with a wheezing infant inside, whose mother had momentarily stepped away. When the mother came out, she was horrified to see a stranger pushing her stroller away with her child inside. She raised an alarm, and bystanders intervened, detaining Biryukov and calling the police. At the police station, Biryukov tried to convince the officers that he was merely playing a prank by taking the stroller to teach the mother a lesson for leaving her child unattended. Being the son of a hero of the Soviet Union, he was believed, fined for his actions, and released. However, in 1972, Biryukov attempted to abduct another infant but, fortunately, failed to carry out his plan. He was detained before he could escape with the child, and an investigation began. At that time, no one suspected that Biryukov specifically targeted the infant. He convinced the investigators that he intended to steal and sell the stroller and had not noticed the baby inside. According to some sources, Biryukov received a 3-year prison sentence for theft, while others suggest that he somehow managed to avoid incarceration. Regardless, his actions led to the breakdown of his family, as his wife decided not to remain married to a criminal and filed for divorce. For a few years, Biryukov managed to suppress his dark fantasies, working and living a seemingly ordinary life. However, in the autumn of 1977, his inner demons resurfaced. While walking in Moscow, he found himself near a children's kitchen on Marshal Biryuzov Street. There, he spotted a stroller with a 3-month-old girl inside. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. Either she had gone inside the building or had stepped away to chat with friends, carelessly leaving her child unattended. Seizing the opportunity, Biryukov grabbed the stroller, took it to a nearby courtyard, removed the infant, and entered a nearby apartment building. He climbed the stairs between the 3rd and 4th floors, placed the girl on the windowsill, and began to unwrap her. She started crying, but at that moment, a door slammed on one of the floors. Startled, Biryukov grabbed a knife he used to sharpen pencils at work and stabbed the girl. She fell silent, and the maniac fled. The body of the deceased child was found by chance, either by the building superintendent during a routine inspection of the stairwells or by a woman who lived in the building and had gone out to walk her own children. An investigation immediately ensued. Initially, detectives suspected that the murdered girl came from a marginalized family and that her own parents were responsible for her death. However, several facts contradicted this theory. The infant was well-nourished, well cared for, and dressed in new, good-quality clothing and diapers. Nonetheless, the distraught mother of the deceased girl was not immediately ruled out as a suspect. The murder in Moscow was reported to the head of the USSR Ministry of Internal Affairs, Nikolai Shelikov, who ordered the case to be classified and prevented information from leaking to the press. However, as time showed, this step was a mistake, as Muscovites continued to leave their children unattended in strollers, a vulnerability that maniac Biryukov exploited. Just 3 days after the first murder, on September 19, 1977, Biryukov abducted another 3-month-old girl. The baby's mother had gone to the Children's World store on Mira Avenue to shop, leaving the stroller with her sleeping child outside the store. The maniac pulled the infant out of the stroller and fled. The girl was searched for all over Moscow, with construction sites, wells, and abandoned buildings being inspected. Her parents held on to the hope that their child had been abducted and taken to another city. However, a month later, the baby's body was found at a city dump. Investigators quickly realized that the 2 infant murders in Moscow were the work of the same maniac. They assumed that the killer was likely a previously convicted criminal with a history of crimes against minors or someone suffering from a mental illness. Detectives reviewed archives and interrogated numerous suspects fitting these profiles, but they failed to find the murderer among them. Meanwhile, as the investigation was proceeding on the wrong track, Biryukov abducted a 6-month-old boy in October 1977. The boy's mother had left him with an elderly neighbor near the entrance to the apartment building, while she quickly ran inside. The maniac suddenly attacked the pensioner, snatched the infant from her arms, and fled. The woman called for help, but by the time passers-by arrived, the perpetrator was long gone. The boy's body was found several days later. By that time, investigators had compiled a list of characteristics of the baby hunter, as Biryukov was nicknamed by Muscovites. When abducting infants, the maniac always pulled a cap over his eyes, so witnesses could not get a clear view of his face. However, they all noted that he wore the same clothes during the attacks: gray pants and a plaid shirt, These descriptions were not very detailed, so police officers and volunteers began checking all men in Moscow who were seen walking with a stroller or carrying a baby. Once the police decided to check a young father who was holding his infant child while waiting for a bus at a bus stop. He turned out to be unrelated to the crimes, but Biryukov, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the police check. Realizing that he was now a target of the manhunt, Biryukov decided to commit his new crimes not in Moscow but in his hometown of Chekhov. Soon, the residents of the suburban town received terrifying news someone had abducted 2 girls under the age of 1, and their bodies were found shortly after. The headquarters for the investigation of the baby hunter case moved to Chekhov, but the initial searches for the maniac were fruitless. On October 21st, Biryukov went hunting again, this time on the outskirts of Chekhov. Near a grocery store, he spotted a lone stroller. Looking around and seeing no adults nearby, Biryukov pulled out the sleeping 4-month-old girl and attempted to escape. However, he failed to notice that the baby's mother was watching through the store window. As soon as she saw Biryukov grab her daughter, she dropped her groceries, ran out onto the street, and started calling for help. Several passers-by heard cries and gave chase. Realizing that he couldn't get far with a baby in his arms, Biryukov abandoned the child on the asphalt. Fortunately, the baby was unharmed. The pursuit of Biryukov continued as he ran headlong through the streets and alleys until he finally reached a forest, where he managed to hide. During the chase, however, he lost his cap, allowing his pursuers to see and remember his facial features: deep-set eyes, scars, and dark hair around his bald spots. A detailed facial composite was created on the same day, and the search for him expanded throughout the Moscow region. At one point, the investigators conducted a check at the very same Moscow construction company where Anatoly Biryukov worked. The company employees were horrified to recognize their colleague, a modest and diligent shock worker, in the facial composite. The baby hunter was detained on the same day at his home. He did not deny his guilt and sadistically recounted to the investigators how he tortured his victims. All 5 murders were committed within a month. He claimed that he killed the first victim in the stairwell out of fear of being identified. It was only after he left the building that he realized that a baby could not be a valuable witness for the investigation. The maniac's candor had a simple explanation. He was confident that his father would come to his rescue, and he would avoid harsh punishment. Initially, Nikolai Biryukov refused to believe that his only son had become a monster, and he hired one of the best and most experienced lawyers for his defense. However, after several court hearings where the prosecution presented their evidence, Nikolai Biryukov could not bear it anymore and publicly disowned his son. He never recovered from the shock and passed away just 2 years after his son's death sentence. The expensive lawyer could not save the baby hunter either. The court sentenced him to death, which was an expected outcome. By that time, specialists from the Serbsky Institute had found Biryukov to be sane, although he was diagnosed with nepophilia, a mental disorder characterized by a sexual attraction to infants. After the sentence, the maniac made several unsuccessful suicide attempts and then began writing petitions for clemency to various authorities, even up to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. All his pleas were rejected. Anatoly Biryukov's last day was February 24th, 1979. Shortly after turning 40 in custody, he faced the executioner's bullet.